I live in a 6-unit apartment building. I'm embarrassed to admit that I barely knew any of my neighbors. It's not entirely my fault. I was busy juggling work and school and plus family who lives an hour away, so I never had time for my neighbors. But COVID would change that. So Muslims believe that paradise lies under the feet of mothers, and we spend our whole life trying to honor and serve our mother. Not always easy, but we try. Last year, I lost my mother to breast cancer, and it shook me to my core. My mom was my everything. Who do I serve now? All my aunts are back home in Palestine, and I was in need of new feet. So if I barely knew my neighbors before the quarantine, maybe now I know them a little bit too well. There's the hipster couple who lives directly above me, Mason and Lana. I know every variation of their baby's cry. I can tell when she's fussy or tired or just needs a cartoon. Mr. Rodriguez and his wife, they live across from me. Who needs TV shows when I get to hear about all the drama of their marriage and his infidelities? They fight, they make up, and then Mr. Rodriguez goes to the back alley stairs and smokes, and I'm usually already there reading a book, so 6 feet apart we chat. It was actually Mr. Rodriguez who told me about Mrs. Lee's son. Mrs. Lee is a Korean immigrant, and she lives alone on the 3rd floor. Well, her son sometimes visits, but mostly she's alone. Mr. Rodriguez puffs on his cigarette while telling me the gory details about what happened to Mrs. Lee's son. 2 white dudes beat the shit out of that poor man. They blamed him for the Chinese disease. They say China brought it on purpose and blamed the Wuhan lab. And just all of this bullshit happens a week after Trump calls COVID the Chinese disease. My heart broke for Mrs. Lee. But I also felt clarity. I knew that Mrs. Lee would be my new adopted mother. So how do I serve her? She speaks 0 English and I speak 0 Korean. Plus, she can't enter my home and I can't enter hers. So I just pray to God to guide me. It comes in the form of a dream. I see that I am cooking makluba in my kitchen for my mom. And I wake up and say, that's it. So I cook makluba for Mrs. Lee. Palestinian makluba. It consists of rice and meat and fried vegetables placed in a pot and when served, flipped upside down. Hence the name makluba, which literally translates to upside down. It's my mom's famous dish. And as I cook, I feel her in the kitchen with me. So I place the makluba in a big Tupperware and put the Tupperware in a big Macy's bag. I add a box of chocolates and a card, and then I put on my mask and head to the 3rd floor. Her son answers. He's not wearing a mask, so I step back. God, I feel pain and joy. Pain because, his face is a dark purple. And joy because I have a translator. I point to the bag on the floor and tell him that I made a Palestinian dish for his mom. Can he call her? So he takes the bag inside and then comes back out with Mrs. Lee, and they're both wearing masks. I look at her, and it is so strange because her soft silver hair reminds me of my mother. I tell Mrs. Lee how heartbroken I was to hear about her son and the hate crime. I tell her that as a Muslim, I understand hate crime. I tell her that I know at a cellular level what it feels like to be blamed for something you had no part in. As a Muslim American, I'm blamed for religious terrorism, and now Asian Americans are being blamed for biological terrorism. I tell her about what happened to me recently outside of my mosque and why I no longer wear a hijab. Her son translates. I tell Mrs. Lee that I made her a Palestinian dish called makluba, which translates to upside down because right now the world feels upside down. And yet, here I am, finally meeting my neighbors of 3 years. And maybe the world was upside down before COVID when no one had time for each other. And maybe now we're just realizing that. I tell Mrs. Lee about the passing of my mother and how Muslims believe that paradise lies under the feet of mothers. I tell her she is my elder, my adopted mother, and so now my paradise lies under her feet. And so whatever she needs, she must call or text or knock at my door because she's no longer my neighbor. She's my mother. I stop talking. Her son translates. There's a moment of silence. It's awkward silence. And then Mrs. Lee stares at me intently, as if she sees something on my face that she recognizes. She takes a small step toward me. And then in perfect English, Mrs. Lee says, "Thank you, daughter."